similarities and differences in China and the United States in their individual responses to this pandemic. One is well on its way to closing out a dark chapter, as we've been seeing. The other is still in the thick of it. So what could have been done differently? Sourabh Gupta is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China-American Studies. He joins me via Skype. So, Sourabh, let's talk about the U.S. response to this pandemic in comparison to China and how it handled the situation. What has worked for the United States? What has not?
What has worked up to a point only, I would say, has been the closing of the borders, which was done at the end of January, early February, particularly with regard to flights coming in from China. It wasn't absolutely essential to do so. After all, South Korea left its border open with China and has done markedly better than the US. So that is not a decisive consideration, but it was a useful consideration on the US's part. What it has not done well at all is do testing at the pace that the Chinese did. It is still grappling with how to go about doing quarantining. Quarantining is not just having people at home. You need to find those who are suspected patients. You need to segregate them. You need to ensure that the chain of transmission is completely broken between healthy and infected. And I'm not sure the US is doing this particularly well, even at this point of time.
Sourabh, the United States and China have different systems of government, obviously, and the US, some might argue, simply cannot impose the type of crackdown or lockdown, the restrictive measures we've seen here in the United States. I mean, here in the US, planes, trains, and cars are still on the streets, but not so when China was in the lockdown. So considering the limitations the US has, are there things the US can still do to get a handle on this?
At the U.S. side, of course, because of federal-state relations, a lot of this falls on the shoulders of states, and it's basically governors who need to take the lead on this front. But the problem has been that you have these Republican governors in some core red states who have just been a little too complacent about it and continue to remain complacent about it. And until there is firm willingness on the part of all politicians to grapple with this with utter seriousness, this cannot be dealt with. At the end of the day, the virus itself has no power. It's about us human beings being the medium through which the virus gains its power. And if Republican governors are not going to do it, frankly, I mean, it doesn't help. Now, let's think about this. You know, the US has something called the Interstate Commerce Clause with regard to cross-border trade. Why can't it have some sort of a clause like that in terms of emergencies, especially when you're facing an extraordinary emergency on the lines of what COVID-19 is today?
And in terms of lessons learned from China during its lockdown, what would you say the biggest lesson is that the United States can learn?
Well, I would say it's about intelligent quarantining. You know, China also turned out was a little late in terms of grappling with the spread. The spread had already exploded in Wuhan. But then what they needed to do is the lockdown needed to be that much more stringent, and thereafter the quarantining needed to be that much more intelligent. Of course, there was testing happening all the while. And I don't think the US has still understood what is intelligent quarantining. It's not just about having people at home, but having that separation between people who are potentially ill and those, of course, we're not talking about those who have serious illnesses at this point of time. That chain of transmission has not been broken in the US, and I don't see how one gets around it if the US is if the US is not going to become a little more smarter in how it grapples with that aspect of it. I think China managed that very, very well, and frankly, I'm hoping the US will learn as it keeps moving forward in trying to grapple with the issue.
All right, Sourabh Gupta, thank you. And as